It's the year 21XX, and Earth is a dying shell of its former self. A fighter jet streaks across the sky above a city engulfed in flames. From the wing of the plane, Shido Jin, a warrior with silver hair and glowing blue eyes, looks down coldly. He has found what he was looking for. Without a parachute, he leaps from the plane and dives straight into the ruins. On the ground, a lone boy sprints through the rubble and smoke. He's the only one left, calling out for anyone who might be listening. The kid stops in the middle of a crosswalk, tears streaming down his face as he screams for help. Right in front of him, a massive horned monster lands, making the pavement shake violently. Another beast lunges from the side, cutting off his only path of escape. The boy falls back, staring up at the creatures closing in on him. He shuts his eyes and lets out one final, desperate cry. In his hand, he clutches a cracked photo of his family. As the monsters loom over him, he thinks about the ones who turned the world into this nightmare. He begs for someone to make them pay for everything they've destroyed. A blinding streak of white light suddenly tears through the red sky. Jin slams into the ground, obliterating one of the monsters under his feet. The soldier looks back at the stunned boy and apologizes for being late. He stands tall amidst the wreckage, his dark coat fluttering in the wind. The boy can only ask who he is. Jin stares forward with a cold, focused expression. The boy is breathless, unable to believe that a savior actually appeared. He looks out at the burning skyline and hopes this means they can finally take their world back. Jin moves to the boy's side as the kid collapses. He sees a massive, fatal wound torn across the boy's back. He tells the child to rest in peace. The boy managed a faint smile and thanked him before going still. His hand falls away as he takes his last breath. Jin stands over him in the silence. The boy's body slumps into the dirt. A man in a lab coat named Kagura walks up and asks if Jin was too late. Kagura adjusts his glasses and tells Jin it's time to face the truth and give up. Jin doesn't answer, keeping his eyes fixed on the ruins. High above, the earth looks like a scorched ember floating in space. Humanity is finished. These monsters, the corruptors, were born from centuries of environmental pollution. They started as mutations in the toxic sludge that covered the planet. They quickly evolved into apex predators that tore through military lines. Conventional weapons were useless because of their extreme regenerative powers. Kagura explains that they didn't give up and eventually used human experiments to find a way to fight back. He shrugs, nodding that there isn't anyone left to save anymore. He looks down at the dead boy, the final member of their species. Jin watches the smoke drift through the city and says there is still something worth saving. Kagura asks if he really believes there are more survivors, but Jin tells him no. He's looking far beyond the present, toward a future millions of years away. He asks about the nanomachines Kagura created to heal the environment. These machines were designed to do more than just stop the corruptors from regenerating. Kagura explains that his nanomachines will eventually trigger the planet's recovery. He's certain that one day, the Earth will return to its former beauty. Shido Jin agrees, believing a new civilization will eventually thrive just as humanity once did. Kagura looks skeptical, calling the whole idea a bit of a fairy tale. Jin doesn't mind. He turns to walk away, satisfied with the plan. Even if it's just a tiny possibility, he thinks it's worth the gamble. He realizes that his own power will be needed to protect that future. Jin enters a high-tech stasis pod, prepared to sleep until the world is ready for him. Kagura watches him, holding onto that slim hope. He figures simply passing on that chance is enough to justify everything they've done. The system confirms that the cold sleep sequence has been activated. Outside, corruptors continue to roam the wasteland, unaware that their end is being planned. A digital timer begins counting up as the centuries start to fly by. Decades turn into centuries, and the monsters continue to dominate the ruins. Time continues its relentless march, and the world begins a slow transformation. Thousands of years pass, and the earth starts to look a little less red. New creatures begin to emerge as the old monsters start to fade away. Nature begins to reclaim the land, covering the scars of the past in green. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the planet's ecosystem stabilizes. The Earth finally looks like a vibrant, living world again. Animals return to the forests and lakes, thriving in the clean air. The timer keeps climbing, reaching into the tens of millions. Finally, after a staggering 100 million years, the clock stops. In the present day, a pair of boots races across a metal floor. Hakama Phil, a young girl with long animal ears, sprints through the dark corridor. A terrifying black beast with glowing red eyes lunges at her. She's not alone. Two other children, a boy with cat ears named Shandy and a sturdier boy named Danpuo, are running right behind her. She tells the boys they're as good as dead if they don't reach the guardian god inside. She clutches a golden key necklace, her only hope for survival. She's certain that the legend of the guardian is real. They reach a heavy set of metal doors at the end of a long hallway. Hakama slams the key into the slot and forces the door open. They stumble into a massive, frost-covered chamber, but it looks like a dead end. Hakama stares into the mist, her heart sinking. The monster catches up, looming over them with its massive, clawed hands. Cornered against the back wall, the children beg for someone to save them. Hakama closes her eyes and screams for the guardian god to help. Suddenly, a massive crack spiders across the glass of a nearby stasis tube. A voice from inside the pod simply says, "Understood." A pillar of blinding white light erupts from the pod, illuminating the entire room and piercing straight through the monster's head. The light is so intense that the children have to shield their eyes. As the glass shatters, a pair of bare feet steps out onto the cold floor. Shido Jin stands tall, his body humming with a level of power that shouldn't be possible. With a confident smirk and glowing blue eyes, he looks ready to protect every possibility of the future he's just woken up to. Jin opens a storage box he found in the wreckage. Inside, his old clothes are perfectly preserved, right next to a glowing green syringe. He turns to a massive bank of monitors. It's almost impossible to process, but the system logs confirm it. He's been out for 100 million years. Shido Jin stares at the corrupted data on the screens. He's honestly impressed the bunker managed to stay intact for such a ridiculous amount of time. He looks down at a nanomachine injector. The only reason anything in this place still works is because of the microscopic machines Kagura dispersed into the atmosphere. There's also a message cube left behind by the scientist. Jin wants to know what happened to the world, but he needs to deal with his current situation first. He turns around to find the three kids who woke him up staring at him in total shock. One is covering their eyes while the others are just completely frozen. While he gets dressed, the kids stand there awkwardly, trying to process the fact that they just dug up a naked man from 100 million years ago. Jin pulls on his long coat and tightens his gloves. After an eternity of being in a tube, having his old gear back on finally feels right. With a deafening grind of gears, the massive bunker doors begin to slide open. It's time to see what 100 million years did to the neighborhood. He steps out into the blinding light, followed by his new audience. They're already whispering about him being some kind of guardian god. Jin takes a breath of fresh air, his eyes scanning the horizon. This isn't the dead rock he expected to wake up to. The world is lush and vibrant. A massive valley with a winding river stretches out below him, looking more like a paradise than a wasteland. Hakama Phil looks up at him, still clearly starstruck. To her, Jin is a legendary figure who just stepped out of a myth. The kids start running toward the woods, waving for him to follow. They seem way too energetic for people living in a world full of monsters. Jin watches them with a flat expression. He's trying to reconcile this green landscape with the ruins he remembers. He looks at the back of Hakama's head and notices her animal ears. Humanity was supposed to be extinct, yet here these creatures are. Then there's the other two, Shandy and Danpuo. One looks like a cat and the other a koala. Evolution clearly took a wild turn while he was asleep. He suspects the nanomachines played a role in how they evolved. Hakama stops and looks back, sensing his confusion. Jin realizes he hasn't even told them who he is yet. He gives them a small smirk and decides it's finally time for introductions. He introduces himself as Shido Jin. Hakama responds with her own name, sounding much more formal than her friends. The chubby one is Danpuo and the cat-eared kid is Shandy. Despite the ears, they speak the exact same language he does. Hakama's face suddenly darkens. She begs Jin to help them fight against creatures she calls corruptors. Shandy suddenly points toward the horizon, his face turning pale as he realizes something is wrong. Columns of black smoke are rising from the trees in the distance. Their village is on fire, and the corruptors have already arrived. Shandy and Hakama don't wait for permission. They bolt toward the smoke, screaming for their parents as they disappear into the brush. Jin follows at a much more relaxed pace. He's curious to see if these corruptors are the same monsters humanity failed to kill eons ago. They reach the village and find the heavy wooden barricades smashed to pieces, like they were made of toothpicks. The entire settlement is in flames. Simple wooden huts are burning to the ground as the kids rush into the center of the carnage. Jin strolls through the fire and debris. Looking at the primitive tech level, he realizes this new civilization isn't advanced at all. Hakama stops dead in her tracks, her eyes wide with horror at the sight ahead of her. An old woman, the village grandma, is putting up a desperate fight against a massive, armored beast with only a wooden staff. The monster roars in her face, and the grandma screams at Hakama to run away while she still can. Jin narrows his eyes as he gets a good look at the beast. It's a corruptor, all right. It looks exactly like the ones from his era. The creature is a nightmare of teeth and armor. Jin wonders if they've been plaguing the world this entire time. Hakama refuses to leave. A bright teal aura begins to glow around her as she prepares to use her own power. Jin decides he's seen enough. He blurs forward, closing the distance between him and the monster in an instant. He delivers a direct kick to the monster's face, the impact generating a powerful shockwave that pierces right through its armored hide. While the beast is reeling, Jin scoops up the grandma and carries her to safety like she weighs nothing. With the old woman safe, Hakama steps up. She charges a massive ball of energy, her eyes glowing with determination. She shouts as she releases the blast. A concentrated beam of light tears through the air toward the stunned monster. The corruptor tries to counter with a blast of flame from its gullet, but Hakama's energy beam slices right through it. The explosion is massive. The monster is engulfed in light and flame, completely obliterated by the girl's attack. Jin looks down at the smoking carcass. It's definitely not getting back up, which he expected. The nanomachines in the air are suppressing its ability to regenerate. He watches the girl, wondering if she actually knows she's tapping into the nanomachines in the atmosphere to pull off those fireball attacks. Back in his time, that kind of control was strictly for compatible humans. He recalls the days when those machines were first created in labs. He asks the elderly woman if everyone in this era can throw fire around like that. She looks at him like he's crazy and says it's only possible for some of them. Jin rubs his chin as he pieces it together. It's clear now, what these people call divine power is just their word for manual nanomachine manipulation. Hakama Phil runs over, frantic to know what happened to everyone else. Grandma reassures her that the rest of the villagers have already been evacuated to safety. Shandy and Danpuo catch up, looking relieved, but Grandma just sighs. She wants to know why they didn't stay in hiding like they were told. Her expression is grim. She tells them the village is as good as gone, despite the small victory they just had. She explains that the corruptor Jin just took down was nothing more than a newborn larva. It was basically a baby compared to what's coming. The main body is the real threat, and it's far beyond anything their current warriors can handle. It won't be long before hundreds of these larval swarms descend on the village and tear everything to shreds. A blue-haired warrior named Sarlis walks up, telling the old woman not to lose her nerve just yet. He rests a spear on his shoulder, boasting that he'll handle the main body and any other corruptor that shows its face. Grandma asks about the villagers, and Sarlis confirms he personally sent them all to the shelter before coming back for the fight. Hakama's father is with him, clearly relieved to see his daughter safe after spending the whole evacuation worrying about her. But Grandma isn't happy. She yells at Hakama for breaking the rules and going to the forbidden place where the bunker was sealed. Hakama clutches her pendant. reminding her that Grandma was the one who said a guardian god lived behind that door to help them in their darkest hour. Grandma looks at Jin, blinking in disbelief. She seems to be trying to reconcile the legend with the man standing in front of her. She admits that he doesn't exactly fit the description of a god. Jin just stares back, wondering what kind of stories they've been telling. Sarlis just laughs. He thinks the whole idea of this guy being a guardian god is a massive joke. He calls Jin an inferior species, a term that catches the protagonist completely off guard. Shandy tries to speak up for the guardian god, but his older brother isn't interested in hearing stories from a kid. Sarlis mocks Jin for his appearance, nodding that he doesn't have animal ears or any of the animal power that defines their race. Sarlis dismisses the earlier kill as a total fluke. He thinks Jin just happened to be standing there when the monster died. He brags that he could have taken out a larva in a single blow himself if he'd been the one to find it. Jin doesn't say a word. He just watches the arrogant warrior with a cold, piercing gaze. Sarlis makes it clear that this is a village problem. In his eyes, an inferior outsider like Jin has no place here. He tells him to back off and stay out of the way of the real warriors. The guy turns his back and starts walking toward the smoke, determined to hunt down the massive corruptor on his own. He tosses a final insult over his shoulder, telling everyone else to just sit back and shake in fear while he does the hard work. Grandma calls him a fool, knowing full well that he's walking into a death trap. She worries that if he ran away, he might at least survive. Jin remains silent, his expression unreadable as he watches the hero walk away. Grandma turns back to Jin, thanking him for his help earlier. She asks if he'd be willing to take the children to the shelter. She intends to follow Sarlis into the fray, prepared to throw her life away if it means protecting what's left of the village. But Jin isn't going anywhere. He rejects the offer immediately, surprising the old woman. Hakama looks up at him with hope in her eyes. Jin simply states that he has his own sense of pride to worry about. He tells them he's not about to let some kid call him an inferior species and then just go off and die. He's going to follow him. A massive corruptor monster breaks through the water's surface with a deafening roar. Sarlis tightens his grip on his weapon, his muscles tensing for the fight. Sarlis stands nearby, his voice calm as he addresses the massive beast. Sarlis lunges forward, blue lightning crackling around him as he declares his ambition to become a holy knight. He positions himself between the village and the monster, ready to defend his home. With a shout, he dives headfirst into the fray, determined to take the monster down himself. But the monster's tentacles begin to wriggle as they rise above the water's surface. At the tips of those tentacles are clusters of developing monster eggs. All at once, these tentacles release the eggs, dropping them into the water. From these eggs, swarms of baby monsters burst out and crawl over each other, leaping straight at Sarlis. Meanwhile, the massive beast remains standing like a towering fortress, not even deigning to lift a finger against such a tiny human. Undeterred, Sarlis swings his spear and charges forward, hacking through the swarms of cannon fodder squirming around the monster. He focuses his energy, determined to finish the fight with one final, powerful blow. He launches himself high into the air, trailing a streak of energy behind him. He brings his spear down with a massive electrical discharge. Sarlis smirks, confident that his strike has hit its mark. The monster is sent reeling back as the shockwave ripples through the water. But the deep gash on the creature's face begins to knit itself back together instantly. Sarlis freezes in disbelief as the wounds vanish before his eyes. The monster counterattacks, its massive limbs swinging down toward the defenseless warrior. Sarlis can only brace himself, unable to dodge the incoming strike. Suddenly, Shidojin appears, blocking the strike with a shimmering hexagonal shield. Sarlis is speechless, wondering where this man came from. But the situation leaves no time for Sarlis to chat. Immediately, one of the hatchlings lunges forward to snap at him. Jin stands there, his expression unfazed as his black coat flutters slightly in the wind, continuing to tank the boss. Meanwhile, Sarlis complains about why those damn cannon fodder monsters are so hard to kill. He raises a hand, readying his own overwhelming power. A massive pillar of light erupts from beneath the lake's surface, tearing through the monster's body like a sheet of paper. Sarlis watches, completely stunned by the scale of the destruction. The rest of the villagers rush toward the shore, calling out to Sarlis. The village elder and her companions stop dead, paralyzed by the sight. She stares at the carnage, unable to believe what just happened. Jin stands against the beast's massive, smoking body, holding it down with just a single hand. He tells Sarlis that the monster is starting to get heavy, and they should move back. Jin grabs the dazed warrior and prepares to clear the area. With a powerful leap, they both soar away from the monster's carcass as it collapses into the lake. They touch down safely on solid ground, away from the surf. Sarlis looks up at Jin, asking who he really is. Behind them, the monster looks like a giant skewer, yet its mangled flesh is already beginning to stitch itself back together once again. Jin explains that they need nanomachines to stop that level of regeneration. Sarlis is baffled, as he's only ever known it as divine power. Jin admits that Sarlis's attack was decent, but it wasn't deep enough to stop the healing. Sarlis wonders aloud if Jin is some kind of guardian deity. Jin looks away, completely uninterested in the title. He reminds Sarlis that this village is his own responsibility, leaving the warrior to agree. Sarlis shouts that he's the one who has to protect the village. Jin stops walking and calmly tells him he's got it all wrong. This is his problem now. The massive corruptor roars, its eyes glowing with a sinister light as it prepares to strike. Jin prepares to move, his focus narrowing on the beast as he readies his counterattack. He knows the first thing he has to do is completely immobilize the monsters. He dashes forward as energy begins to pool around his hands in a blinding flash. A huge explosion of light rocks the shore as Jin's power connects with the creature. Sarlis watches from the ground, realizing these monsters are a legacy of a foolish past. Lightning crackles violently around Jin's fist as he builds up his next massive strike. Jin looks back and mentions that since he lived 100 million years ago, this fight belongs to him. He gathers an incredible amount of energy, determined to settle the score once and for all. Sarlis is confused by the claim, but asks if Jin can actually pull this off. Flashbacks of endless wars and a blood-stained history flood Jin's mind. He remembers the tragic, brutal repetitions of humanity's past struggles in a forgotten era. He recalls the scientists and their labs, the birthplace of his very existence. Jin stands tall, declaring himself the very last creation of the human race. With a final shout, he prepares to unleash his full power on the target. The monster can only screech in terror as a massive blast of energy starts to consume it. A titanic beam of light shoots forward, disintegrating everything it touches in its path. The explosion is so huge it dwarfs the entire landscape, lighting up the sky. The villagers and Sarlis are frozen in place, unable to look away from the blinding brilliance. A young girl, Hakama Phil, watches with wide eyes as her fear is replaced by pure wonder. The beam of light is so intense it actually pierces the atmosphere and shoots into outer space. As the light fades, the storm clouds are gone, leaving a clear blue sky and calm water. Sarlis is left completely stunned, his jaw dropping at the absolute power he just witnessed. Jin stands amidst the dissipating energy, the heat from the blast still radiating off his back. He introduces himself with a smirk. He is the last scientific weapon. Deep in the brush, someone has been watching the entire fight through a specialized lens. It's the unknown night observer, a ginger-haired investigator sent to look into the new invaders. She's shaking with fear, nodding that not even the strongest holy knights could match that display. Her face is pale as she tries to process the unbelievable power of this mysterious man. She knows she has to get back to the royal capital immediately to report what she found. Later that night, Jin sits in the forest and activates a hologram message from an old friend. A scientist named Kagura appears, greeting him with a tired smile from across the eons. Kagura looks out at the stars, wondering how the future is treating his old friend. He admits that while the environment has improved, there's still a major problem to solve. Kagura explains that the corruptors were far more resilient than they ever imagined. Jin listens in silence, his expression unreadable as his friend speaks from the distant past. The message continues, showing Kaguya working at a terminal 1,000 years after Jin went asleep. He reveals that he spent centuries entering cold sleep himself just to keep an eye on things. Kaguya watched from a high-tech satellite as the world slowly changed over the millennia. Despite his efforts, he realized that the threat to the planet was evolving alongside it. A view through a scope captures a high-resolution image of a target moving across the field. The lens zooms in on an evolved corruptor, its red eyes staring back with a predatory and focused gaze. Static fills the screen as the recording shifts, moving to a different section of encoded data. Hologram Kaguya explains that corruptors began to evolve alongside the drastic environmental changes of the planet. He warns that these evolved creatures will undoubtedly become a major and persistent threat to any survivors. To counter this, Kaguya reveals he tweaked the genetics of newly born life forms, like Sarlis and the other beastmen. He shows an image of Hakama Phil, explaining that these modifications were meant to give her kind a fighting chance. Kaguya adds that he also left behind a specific source of power, intended only for Jin's use. Shido Jin looks at the flickering image, curious about the nature of the power his old friend mentioned. He holds up a syringe filled with a glowing green substance, recognizing the power Kaguya spoke of. Jin calmly injects the fluid into his arm, as the hologram explains that the nanomachines will soon guide him. Lightning-like energy surges through Jin's body, as he achieves full compatibility with the active nanomachines. Jin stares at his gloved hands, feeling the strange new energy circulating through his modified system. With a focused thought, a sharp metal blade materializes directly out of thin air in his palm. He reflects on the incredible ability to generate physical objects through the shape-shifting of the nanomachines. Jin tests the balance of the newly formed knife, finding the ancient technology to be remarkably handy. Kaguya explains that he hid similar power-ups in various research labs scattered all over the world. A map displays the locations of these labs, strategically separated to prevent corruptors from destroying them all. Kaguya shares his heartfelt wish for Jin to travel and experience the new world of the far-distant future. A serene landscape with a majestic waterfall represents the peaceful world Kaguya hoped would remain for Jin. Despite the uncertainty of the corruptor threat, Kaguya wanted Jin to find his own place in this era. The unknown night observer runs through the woods, embodying the lively spirit of the current world. She is breathless and full of excitement, a stark contrast to the grim and dying world Jin once knew. A bustling medieval-style city shows the architectural and social progress humanity has achieved. In a quiet library, a blonde noblewoman pores over ancient texts, unaware of the ancient weapon's return. Kaguya encourages Jin to take the time to simply enjoy this new world before anything else. The holographic image begins to distort and flicker as the old recording finally reaches its end. An older, wizened version of Kaguya appears one last time, asking Jin to protect this world until the end. Jin remains stoic and silent, watching the last remnants of his old friend's presence fade away into the night. The message concludes with Kaguya leaving the fate of the entire world in Jin's capable hands. Jin quietly acknowledges the request, just as Hakama Phil and Danpuo come running toward him. Phil is relieved to have finally found him, mentioning that everyone in the village has been searching. She grabs his arm and insists they head back quickly, as the celebration can't start without its star. As they walk, Shido Jin's attention is suddenly drawn to the pendant hanging around Phil's neck. He realizes with a shock that the simple charm is actually a high-level lab access key. He stops her and asks where she managed to get such a specialized and ancient pendant. Phil explains that the charm has been a treasured heirloom of her clan for many generations. She says the key was meant to protect them, ensuring the guardian deity would aid them in times of peril. Jin looks up at the stars, realizing he owes Phil's ancestors for preserving the means of his return. They arrive at the village center, where a massive bonfire has been lit for the night's festivities. The villagers are in high spirits, calling out to one another to join the feast and celebration. A hush falls over the villagers as they spot Jin, whispering in awe at the return of their guardian deity. Shido Jin stands calmly among the gathered villagers, his presence commanding respect despite his unassuming frame. A few men sitting by the fire voice their lingering disbelief, questioning if someone as scrawny as Jin could really have defeated the monster. Over here, our young man, Jin, watches everything with a brooding look. He notes how Sarlis is making a scene, brawling loudly with a bunch of local youths. The atmosphere shifts as one of the warriors shouts at the others, reminding them that they only ran away while Jin fought. Danpuo and Hakama Phil stand proudly beside Jin, enthusiastically declaring to everyone how amazing their guardian deity truly is. Jin notices the dramatic shift in the people's behavior, realizing they are acting like completely different people compared to earlier this afternoon. Grandma and a senior village member approach Jin, bowing slightly as they prepare to offer their official thanks. The village elder expresses his deep gratitude, stating that the entire village would have perished if Jin had not been there to protect them. Jin offers a small, humble smile and tells them there is no need for them to worry about repaying him for his help. He clarifies that if they truly insist on giving him something, he would prefer information instead of physical rewards. The villagers are caught off guard when Jin explains that he wants to learn the detailed current state of the world they live in. After a moment of thought, Grandma suggests that the best place for him to find such information would be the royal capital. A panoramic view shows the grand city of Kermosia, a hub where people from all over the country gather under the king's rule. Grandma mentions that the people of Kodama village frequently travel there to sell their specialty goods, made from wood silkworm thread. She admits that while the journey is long and dangerous, she has no doubt that the guardian deity will be perfectly fine. Grandma suggests that Hakama Phil should accompany him as his guide, as the girl already has her own reasons to visit the capital. She reveals that Hakama Phil can wield divine power, and that the royal capital is home to an academy dedicated to enhancing such gifts. Morning breaks over Kodama village, casting a warm glow over the peaceful valley and its winding river. Shido Jin steps out into the early light, breathing in the fresh air of a world he's finally returned to. He finds it hard to believe he's witnessing such a beautiful sight again after 100 million years. His thoughts wander to his old comrade Kagura, wishing he could share this breathtaking view with him. Sals, a young girl from the village, arrives with a fresh set of clothes for his journey. She tells him to put them on, offering him a specialized Kodama cloth as he prepares to depart. The village comes together under the bright sky to see their guardian deity off. Hakama Phil, the village leader, reminds Sals to fulfill her role as a guide properly. Nearby, the blue-haired Sarlis grumbles about having to stay behind and study, while others get to go on an adventure. Jin takes a moment to recognize Sals and gives Sarlis a bit of praise for his movements the previous day. Sarlis is absolutely thrilled, his face lighting up with excitement at the compliment. He pumps his fist, swearing to work hard at his studies while Jin shakes hands with the village men. The girl's father tells Hakama to take care of her health and stay safe while staying in the village. Jin gives a final wave to the cheering villagers as he prepares to hit the road. With Sals leading the way, the two set off on their long trek toward the royal capital. They travel through lush forests and follow the sparkling river as it winds through the mountains. By the time the sun begins to set, they reach a massive waterfall where the water shimmers like gold. Sals points out their path ahead, eager to keep moving while the light still lasts. As night falls, they set up a small campfire in the middle of the dark, quiet woods. While they eat, Sals mentions that they still have about 4 days of walking left before they reach the capital. She looks at him curiously and asks why he's so interested in learning about the state of the world. Jin just gives her a slight smile, telling her it's a secret for now. He recalls a warning from Kagura about how the monsters known as corruptors never truly go extinct. In his time, these beasts were a constant threat, thriving in the most polluted and toxic regions. But looking at the clean, vibrant environment around them, he realizes something about the world has changed. A grim expression crosses his face as he stares into the fire, sensing a new kind of danger. Sals notices his intense look and asks if everything is okay, remarking on how scary he looks. He apologizes, realizing he needs to investigate the people of this era before taking on the corruptors. Sals is left a bit confused by his sudden shift in tone and his talk of investigation. Jin then asks her to stop with the formal titles and just call him by his name. Their peaceful night is suddenly interrupted by the sound of galloping horses echoing through the trees. A group of mounted soldiers pulls up to their campsite, their horses kicking up dust in the moonlight. One of the knights speaks up, offering a polite apology for disturbing their rest. A small unit of armored warriors surrounds the camp, keeping a close eye on the pair. Their leader, a stern man with pointy ears, watches Jin with a sharp, calculating gaze. Jin remains perfectly calm as he sits by the fire, simply asking who they are. The man introduces himself as Argus Walton, a captain in the 7th Division of the Holy Knights. Jin recognizes the name, knowing these are the elite defenders of the royal capital. Karina, a hot-headed knight with dog ears, glares at him with clear annoyance. She yells at him for his lack of respect, demanding that he stand up when speaking to their captain. Argus quickly steps in to quiet her down, jumping off his horse to handle things personally. He offers another apology for the rudeness and asks Jin if he would be willing to have a talk. Argus Walton stands firm, demanding that the two strangers answer his questions. He leans down from his horse, his eyes sharp as he asks for their origin and destination. Sals, trembling as she clutches her snack, quickly explains that they are from Kodama village on their way to the capital. Karina, the aggressive knight with dog ears, lets out a mocking smirk at the girl's answer. She jumps off her horse, her armor clanking as she prepares to interrogate them herself. She points her blade at Shido Jin, yelling that there's no record of a human being born in Kodama village. Jin is impressed by the country's organization, surprised to hear that they even maintain birth records for the villages. As Karina continues to berate them, Argus suddenly cuts her off with a sharp no. He turns his focus to Salsa's tunic, identifying the high-quality Kodama cloth she's wearing. He explains that since such fine cloth for children is so rare, her story about her village is likely true. Despite his reasoning, he still feels uneasy and draws his ornate longsword. He levels the blade at Shido Jin, sensing a presence that feels far from an ordinary human. He examines Jin's modern gray shirt and coat, questioning where in the world such unfamiliar clothes came from. Shido Jin remains perfectly composed, his gaze unwavering even as the sword draws close. Argus warns them that many bandit groups use innocent-looking children as a cover to steal cargo. Sals desperately shouts that they aren't bandits, but Argus insists on judging that for himself. The young girl grits her teeth, her fear starting to turn into a flicker of defiance. Argus thinks about how some bandits use powerful spirit magic to overwhelm unsuspecting merchants. He watches Sals closely, his eyes narrowed as he evaluates her every move. He warns the girl not to try anything foolish as the tension at the campsite peaks. He is surprised by her latent power, thinking that she actually has a promising future ahead of her. Shido Jin watches the exchange in silence, nodding that these holy knights are more perceptive than he expected. Argus turns his full attention back to the silver-haired man, acknowledging that he is truly strong. He points his sword directly at Jin's chest, demanding to know his true identity once and for all. He threatens to cut Jin down on the spot if his next answer doesn't satisfy him. Jin stares back with ice-cold blue eyes, his silence only making the knight captain more tense. The two lock eyes in a silent standoff, with the crackling fire the only sound in the night. Argus shouts his threat again, his sword glowing as he prepares to strike with his divine power. Shido Jin doesn't even flinch, his gaze remaining steady and unwavering as death looms. Argus Walton's eyes widen as they lock onto Jin, but he's already starting to waver under our protagonist's overwhelming aura. Letting out a calm sigh, Jin reaffirms that he indeed hails from Kodama village. Karina and the other knights are completely bewildered to see their leader suddenly hesitate. She jumps in, insisting that Jin is far too suspicious. Argus sheathes his blade with a trembling hand, his previous hostility completely gone. He turns back to Sals, asking her one last time if she is really telling the truth about her guide duties. Sals is still in shock. She looks at Jin and reaffirms to herself that he truly is the legendary guardian deity of her village. Argus ponders the title for a moment before letting out a soft, "I see," his suspicion finally lifted. Shido Jin asks if they are finished with this interrogation, his voice remaining as calm as ever. Argus hops back onto his horse, telling Jin that his earlier aggression was just a necessary part of his job. He asks if they are also headed to the royal capital, and remarks that their paths will likely cross again. He invites Jin to come seek him out if he ever finds himself in trouble in the capital city. Without another word, Argus Walton and his knights turn their horses and ride off into the dark forest. Shido Jin stands by the dying embers of the fire, watching the knights disappear into the night. As they cross a wooden bridge, Karina's voice rings out across the valley, questioning why they backed down. She gallops alongside Argus, unable to hide her frustration that such a suspicious, inferior species was let go. Argus Walton rides in silence for a moment, the weight of the brief encounter still heavy on his shoulders. He stares straight ahead, wondering to himself which of them was truly the inferior species back there. His words hit the other knights like a physical blow, leaving Karina and a calm, teal-haired mermaid knight stunned. The unnamed mermaid knight, her fin-like ears twitching, quietly asks her captain if he noticed something the others didn't. Argus reflects on the terrifying reality of the power gap between himself and the man at the campsite. He reveals that he actually attempted to strike Shido Jin 3 times during their conversation. He remembers the moment he leveled his sword at Jin, feeling an invisible wall of pressure blocking his path. Despite his training and intent, every time he tried to move his arm for an attack, his body simply wouldn't respond, paralyzed by a presence far greater than his own. The cold, unwavering eyes of the guardian deity had neutralized him before he could even begin. To the outside world, it looked like a simple standoff, but for Argus, it was a humiliating defeat. The mermaid knight is taken aback, asking if he even tried to activate his divine power. Karina's jaw drops as her captain admits that his power wouldn't even manifest in that man's presence. He recalls how the spirits themselves seemed to shrink away, refusing to answer his call for strength. The mermaid knight admits that she felt a similar chilling sensation, her own connection to the spirits wavering. As they ride under the starlight, Argus notes the massive disparity in their fundamental divine power. He tells them that a feat of that magnitude would likely only be possible for a grand captain. The knights continue their journey in a tense silence, the frustration evident in Karina's expression. The young dog-eared knight clenches her reins, ashamed that she didn't notice the invisible struggle at all. Argus offers a bit of comfort, reminding her that she's a new recruit and Jin is an absolute anomaly. The group gallops through the open plains, their discussion turning toward the defeated corruptor in Kodama. Karina worries about the danger Jin might pose, but Argus is confident the man isn't their enemy. They decide to put the matter aside and focus on returning to the royal capital as soon as possible. Argus plans to delegate the bandit task to the guild, his mind still occupied by the guardian deity. High above the forest, the majestic spires of the royal capital loom against the night sky. He believes that if they can make an ally of Shido Jin, it could change the future of the entire country. The next day, the sun shines over a beautiful valley as Jin and Sals continue their long walk. Sals looks up at Jin, wide-eyed, asking if all the knights in the city are as powerful as those they met. Jin explains that the group from the night before was likely an elite unit of the Holy Knights. Sals starts shadowboxing, amazed by how quickly the captain was able to use his spirit magic. She tells him that divine power is what they call the ability to borrow the strength of the spirits. She further explains that the specific techniques used to channel that power are called spirit magic. Jin realizes that the spirits she's talking about are actually the nanomachines he controls. He finds it ironic that in this new age, his advanced technology is viewed as something mystical. But the way the knights look down on him as an inferior species still bothers him. He lets out a deep sigh, reflecting on how much the social structure of the world has changed. Sals chirps that there is a vast diversity of species living across the world nowadays. She lists off various types, including those that look like fish or even strange insects. She shares an old story from her grandmother about a time when their ancestors had almost nowhere to live. Sals explains how people changed over millions of years, adapting their bodies to suit the harsh environments they lived in. Shido Jin listens intently, contemplating how these diverse species are the result of millions of years of natural adaptation. He wonders if some human survivors simply evolved into these forms before deciding that dwelling on the distant past is currently useless. He asks if those who failed to adapt and change are the ones the world now labels as the inferior species. Sals confirms this, noting that because they remained unchanged, the rest of the world views them as inferior in many ways. She reveals the grim reality that many of these people are sold into slavery, leaving Jin stunned by the existence of such a system. Sals admits that she finds the discrimination strange, believing it is wrong to mistreat others simply because they are a little different. Jin looks at the young girl, reflecting on how the rest of the world seems to have gone mad with its twisted hierarchies. A faint, genuine smile appears on Jin's face as he tells Sals that she is a truly good person. Sals looks up at him with a puzzled expression, clearly surprised by the sudden and heartfelt compliment. Their conversation is interrupted by the sound of a wooden staff dragging across the dirt path further ahead of them. A faint and desperate plea for help reaches their ears, causing Jin and Sals to look toward the source of the voice. A young girl with light blue hair and animal ears suddenly stumbles into the middle of the road, her legs giving out. She falls face first onto the dusty path, prompting Sals to cry out in alarm and rush over to check on her. Jin watches with a serious expression, his attention drawn to the girl's unusual appearance as she lies motionless. The girl, Poful, lies exhausted on the ground, her body showing clear signs of struggle and injury. Jin focuses on the side of her head, noticing a human ear, a clear indication that she is a member of the inferior species. Poful is collapsed on the dirt, breathing hard. Jin stands over her, noticing the bruises all over her body. Hakama rushes to Poful's side, asking if she's all right. Jin starts gathering energy in his hand, telling Poful to stay still so he can treat her. Poful looks up with a nervous, conflicted expression. Jin's instincts kick in, and he tells them not to move. Poful suddenly pulls a knife and holds it to Hakama's throat. The girl is using her friend as a shield, keeping Jin at a distance. Jin just stares back with a cold, blank look. Poful is trembling, but she tells him it's a perfect trap. Jin's eyes narrow as he senses several others hiding nearby. A shimmering figure starts to materialize out of thin air. The slave leader appears, congratulating Poful on a job well done. He steps forward with two of his men, confident he's won. Jin recognizes the trick immediately as stealth camouflage powered by nanomachines. The bandits surround him, and the leader asks which country an inferior species like him is from. He presses his sword right against Jin's neck. Hakama screams out for Jin, but the leader warns him that he knows what happens if he moves. Poful keeps the knife steady while the air begins to crackle. Jin calls out Hakama's name as things start to get violent. A sudden burst of electricity shocks Hakama. Jin tells them that power isn't meant to be used on people. Hakama is paralyzed by the electrical current. The leader is thrilled, realizing Jin actually has holy power. One of the goons leans in, mockingly asking Jin if he can use it too. He winds up for a heavy strike. The thug kicks Jin right in the chest, calling him an inferior species. The leader tells him to stop before he damages the merchandise. They laugh at the idea of an inferior species having any real power. Hakama realizes these are the slave traders the Holy Knight warned them about. The leader decides they've talked enough and hits them with a finishing shock. Hakama is terrified as she feels her consciousness slipping away. Everything is dark until Jin's voice starts calling out to her. Hakama snaps awake, gasping for air in the dim light. She sees Jin sitting there, but he's been stripped of almost all his clothes. Jin calmly looks around the room, asking where they are. He deduces that they've been taken to the slavers' headquarters. There are cages lined up all along the walls, filled with other victims. Every cage is packed with people who have been attacked just like they were. Jin sits cross-legged on the floor, seemingly unbothered by the situation. Hakama is baffled and asks why he's just sitting there naked. Jin tells her his clothes were rare artifacts, but he spent most of his life naked anyway. Hakama still can't wrap her head around it and asks Jin why he didn't just fight back earlier. Jin just stares ahead without saying a word, leaving the question hanging. Suddenly, the sound of heavy doors opening echoes through the dungeon. Jin sits calmly while Hakama glares at the newcomer. Poful walks in carrying a wooden tray with a few rolls of bread. Hakama starts shouting at her, but Poful just tells them to go ahead and hate her. Standing outside the bars, the blue-haired girl says she never expected them to forgive her anyway. Hakama's face is twisted with frustration as she grips the iron bars. Surprisingly, Jin tells her that she is actually a very kind person. Poful is stunned, not understanding why he'd say that after everything she did. Jin explains that a real villain doesn't care about being hated or forgiven. He gets up and walks over to the front of the cage. Jin reaches out and grabs the thick iron bars with his bare hands. Poful watches in horror as the metal starts to groan and twist. With almost no effort, Jin begins warping the cell door right in front of her. He looks her in the eye and mentions that he's been waiting for her to show up so they could talk privately. Jin drops a bombshell, asking where the person she is trying to protect is being held. Poful is completely caught off guard, wondering how he could possibly know that. He admits he was fooled for a second, but then realized the truth. Jin points out that while her own injuries were real, a true villain would never inflict that much pain on a comrade just for a trap. He deduces that the only reason she's following the bandits is because they have leverage over her. Poful starts to break down, unable to keep up the act any longer. Jin hits the nail on the head, asking if it is her brother they are holding. She remembers the bandits threatening to sell him off to traders if she didn't cooperate. The memory of being separated from her only family is too much for her to handle. Poful cries out that she had to do it to keep him safe after their parents were killed. Jin clenches his fist while Hakama looks on in shock at the tragic story. A dark shadow falls over Jin's face as he calls the slavers absolute scum. Hakama asks if he let himself get caught just to save Poful. Jin says that is part of it, but mostly because villains are like oil stains, they are stubborn and don't go away easily. He explains that if you let even one escape, they will just move somewhere else and cause more misery. Outside, a beastman guard hears a strange clacking sound coming from the cell. Before the guard can even react, Jin kicks the entire door off its hinges, sending it crashing into the guy. He steps out of the cage into the hallway, ready to finish this. Jin's eyes glow with a cold intensity as he says you have to pull villainy out by the roots. To understand how he knows so much about villains, we have to look back 100 million years. The scene shifts to a massive, glowing cyberpunk city filled with flying cars and high-rises. Back then, Jin was just a kid living on the streets, covered in dirt and grime. He used to watch the news and see reports about heroes taking down drug cartels. Living in a world that looked perfect on the surface, he really wanted to believe in justice. But as he walked those neon streets, he started to see the cracks in the system. He quickly realized that a world needing justice was not as simple as it looked on TV. Looking back at his childhood in the futuristic city, Jin remembers it as a place teeming with people who were nothing but trash. All he wanted was to live a normal life, but the thugs on the street wouldn't let him have a moment of peace. He quickly realized that his environment wouldn't allow for a quiet existence, and his cold eyes began to reflect that harsh reality. So he made a choice to stop being the victim and start being the one who took control. The thugs who once looked down on him were suddenly the ones begging for mercy as he systematically tore through them. He didn't just defend himself, he crushed them completely, proving he was far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. From that day on, his life became a cycle of violence where his only goal was to eliminate the scum of the world. He kept killing until he was sitting atop a mountain of those who had tried to cross him, his heart becoming as cold as the neon lights. Then one day, a man arrived and told him something that would change everything. Jin stared back at the stranger, his expression unreadable despite the blood on his face. The man in the lab coat looked down at him and said he was simply born into the wrong world, one that couldn't contain his power. Back in the present, the nearly naked Shido Jin strides through the slaver compound, dragging a defeated guard behind him like a piece of garbage. The remaining guards are terrified, pointing their weapons and shouting at him to stop his advance. They look at their fallen comrades and realize that this intruder is something they have never encountered before. One of the slavers trembles, demanding to know where Jin even came from and what his purpose is. Jin just gives them a slight, mocking smile that tells them exactly how little he thinks of their threats. In an instant, he is upon them, grabbing a guard and throwing him into the air with inhuman strength. The slavers are completely outmatched, unable to even track his movements as he tears through their ranks. He strikes with surgical precision, taking down the armed men before they can even pull a trigger or swing a club. A beastman guard watches in horror as his fellow soldier is effortlessly incapacitated. Standing tall amidst the defeated guards, Jin's presence is overwhelming, and the survivors can only wonder who he really is. The sounds of the slaughter continue to echo through the halls, leaving the guards in a state of pure panic. A loud scream rings out, cutting through the noise of the battle and drawing everyone's attention. Poful, the blue-haired girl who was forced to betray Jin, hears the commotion and can't believe what is happening. Poful asks about Jin's partner, and Hakama Phil, the brown-haired beast-eared girl, responds with absolute certainty. Hakama looks on with wide, hopeful eyes, telling Poful that they will be fine because they have a guardian god on their side. She encourages the other captives to stay calm, believing that Jin is the answer to their prayers. Nearby, a sleazy man with a goatee and a brown trench coat, the slave leader, realizes he is in deep trouble. He can feel the immense divine power radiating from Jin and knows that a physical fight is out of the question. Trying to save himself, he begs Jin to wait and talk, his hands raised in a desperate plea for a deal. The slave leader forces a nervous grin, sweating as he tries to find out what Jin actually wants. He asks if it is money or slaves, desperately gesturing toward the cages to offer up anything for his life. He points to a young, terrified blue-haired boy in a cage, Poful's brother, offering him to Jin as if he were just a commodity. Jin looks at the leader with a gaze so cold it could freeze the air, his disgust for the man growing with every word. He steps over the bloodied body of a fallen guard, asking the leader if he is finally done talking. The slave leader is paralyzed by fear, unable to understand how someone could be so unmoved by his offers. He wonders why his spirit magic isn't working on this intruder, his panic reaching a boiling point. Looking up at Jin's imposing figure, the leader begins to realize that he has made a fatal mistake. Jin tells him that it actually helps that he is just a half-baked villain, making him much easier to deal with. He explains that real villains are smart enough to run the second they see they are outmatched. Jin mocks the leader for his arrogance, pointing out how he only started acting submissive once he realized he was going to lose. The slave leader can only grit his teeth in a mix of fury and terror, realizing his time is running out. Realizing that he has no other choice, the slave leader decides to play his final, most dangerous card. He lunges for a lever on the wall, screaming that the fight is far from over. With a desperate pull, he activates the mechanism, his face twisted in a mixture of terror and hope. A massive steel gate slides open, revealing a monstrous creature hidden in the darkness of the stronghold. Shido Jin watches as the beast emerges, recognizing the creature as an invader, a being from another world. The slave leader laughs maniacally, boasting that this beast was specially procured at the request of a mysterious, powerful individual. The massive, purple-skinned invader roars, its presence filling the room with a sense of impending doom. It raises a colossal fist, ready to crush the intruder who has dared to dismantle their operation. Despite the monster's size, Jin remains completely unfazed, his eyes locked onto his new opponent. The invader strikes with enough force to shatter stone, but Jin meets the attack head-on, bracing himself for the impact. The slave leader's jaw drops in disbelief as he watches a mere human withstand the full power of his trump card. Jin calmly explains that his body is far from ordinary, having been born with a constitution that defies common logic. He flexes his muscles, nodding that his density of muscle fibers is many times greater than that of a normal human. The invader struggles against Jin's iron grip, unable to move the smaller man an inch. Declaring that he won't hold back against an enemy of this caliber, Jin begins to channel a surge of crackling blue energy. He unleashes his true divine power, a blinding beam of light that tears through the invader with absolute authority. The slave leader is thrown back by the shockwave, his eyes wide with horror as his ultimate weapon is vaporized before him. Standing amidst the dust and light, Jin looks down at the pathetic man, questioning why he can't even tap into such power. He looms over the fallen antagonist, his cold gaze demanding an answer for what comes next. All the leader can do is stutter and beg for mercy, his previous arrogance completely extinguished. He realizes with a sinking heart that he has encountered a being far beyond his understanding, and that escape is impossible. With a single final punch, Jin shuts down the leader's pleas, delivering justice with a cold and simple refusal. Shido Jin finally gets his hands back on his black coat. He puts it on, feeling more like himself now that he's back in his own clothes. He looks over at the kids still trapped in the cage and tells them to sit tight for just a bit longer. Nino and the other children look up through the bars, their eyes full of hope. Jin heads over to a nearby desk, wanting to dig up some evidence of what these bandits have been up to. He pulls open a drawer and finds a ring of keys along with some papers. He picks up a document that looks important, thinking this has to be what he's looking for. But as he looks closer, he realizes the writing is in some ancient script he's never seen. He stares at the page, trying to decode the symbols. Turns out he has absolutely no clue how to read this stuff. He decides he'll have to get Hakama to give him some reading lessons later on. He turns his attention to the remains of the corruptors on the floor, wondering why the bandits wanted them so badly. Jin decides to let his tech do the heavy lifting and activates his nanomachines. He uses them to hack into the local area and access any stored camera footage. He figures there's bound to be some visual records from the last week. A series of holographic screens pop up in the air around him. One of the feeds shows the bandit leader meeting with a well-dressed beastman inside the hideout. The noble-looking guy has a sinister grin as he keeps his plans secret. The man, Lord Champion, laughs about something interesting that's about to happen in the country. Jin watches the recording intently, his expression darkening as he listens to the Lord. The scene shifts to the bright, open streets of the town. A crowd has gathered in the square to watch the aftermath of the raid. Poful and Power are standing in the middle of the street, looking around anxiously. Suddenly, Poful's eyes widen as she spots a familiar face in the crowd. Nino comes running toward her, shouting for his big sister. Poful doesn't waste a second and sprints right for him. She pulls him into a tight embrace, whispering her thanks that he's finally safe. She turns to thank Jin with tears in her eyes, but he just tells her not to worry about it. Jin looks over at the guards and asks if they're working for the local lord. Power shakes her head and explains that these guys are actually from the guild. She points out an old man in a suit with massive ram horns who's leading the operation. The old man, Padrak, looks over and notices Jin standing there. He walks over to the group and asks if Jin is the one responsible for taking down the bandits. He introduces himself as Padrak, the guildmaster, and bows deeply to show his gratitude. He's a veteran leader with a sharp mind and a formal way of speaking. Padrak is visibly stunned that a human could take on so many enemies without taking a single hit. He realizes right away that Jin is no ordinary man. Jin asks why the Lord isn't the one handling the arrests if this is his territory. Padrak explains that the guild staff are the only ones who deal with these crimes, as they're loyal to the king. He adds that if someone like Lord Champion committed a crime, the guild would report it directly to the throne. Jin thinks it over, realizing the guild functions like the police while the Lord is more like a mayor. He looks back at the memory of Champion's face, knowing exactly who's really behind the corruption. Padrak takes the scroll and begins to read, his expression shifting from curiosity to pure shock. He can't believe his eyes as he realizes the document is a complete list of everyone who was doing business with the bandits. Jin asks if the local lord's name is on there, and Padrak confirms that with this evidence, they can round up all the traitors at once. Jin looks on with a cold, calculating gaze, realizing that the man in charge is even more of a villain than he thought. Poful and Nino watch the exchange with confusion, wondering what the two men are planning to do next. Padrak explains that the guild will take full responsibility for the freed slaves and make sure those with known families are escorted home. However, he admits that there's nothing they can do for the orphans whose identities are unknown or who have no place to return to. Jin looks down at the two blue-haired children, asking the guildmaster if there aren't any shelters where they can stay. Padrak turns away with a heavy sigh, explaining that there simply aren't any facilities like that for inferior species in this city. The two kids look down at the ground, feeling the weight of the rejection and the uncertainty of their future. Jin lets out a frustrated sigh, realizing that the prejudice against humans is a deep-rooted problem even in this part of the world. He looks at the children, feeling a sense of responsibility to do something more than just leaving them to fend for themselves. Suddenly, a thought crosses Jin's mind as he remembers something important. He asks Nino and Poful if they'd be willing to go to a place where they could actually find steady work and a roof over their heads. A small, knowing smirk plays on his lips as he confirms that he already has a very specific destination in mind. He thinks back to his meeting with Argus Walton, the noble knight who had offered him help if he ever needed it. Jin decides that Argus's estate would be the perfect special workplace for the two children to start a new life. The scene shifts to the royal capital of Kermosia, specifically the grand and sprawling estate of the Walton family. Outside the city, Argus is leading his knights back home when he suddenly stops, feeling a strange and intense chill run down his spine. One of his subordinate knights, a woman with long teal hair, notices his hesitation and asks if anything is wrong. Argus shakes it off, telling her it's nothing and continuing his ride toward the estate. Upon reaching the stables, Argus dismounts and hands the reins of his horse over to one of the attendants. He turns to his weary knights and commends them for their hard work on the long expedition, telling everyone to get some rest. With the business of the expedition finished, he makes his way inside the main house. As soon as he steps through the front door, the entire household staff bows in unison to welcome their lord back home. Argus wastes no time and asks his head butler if there have been any significant updates while he was away. The butler looks a bit unsettled, and the young maid standing behind him seems equally worried. Sensing the heavy atmosphere, Argus stops and asks point-blank if something bad happened during his absence. The butler apologizes for having to bring up troubling news when the Lord has only just returned from a tiring journey. Argus assures him that he doesn't mind and tells him to speak freely about whatever is on his mind. High above the main hall, a beautiful blonde woman in a blue dress watches the conversation with a cold and distant look. She stands there silently, her arms crossed as she listens to the butler deliver his report to Argus. After hearing the details, Argus thanks the butler for his diligence, stating that keeping him informed is part of his duty. However, his face darkens as he admits that the overall situation in the capital is far worse than he had anticipated. He thinks about the reports of invaders appearing right inside the city walls, causing chaos and destruction. He realizes that the breach in security is too precise, leading him to believe that someone must be letting them in on purpose. After considering the possibilities, he concludes that the most suspicious place of all is Harnisk Academy, which stubbornly refuses entry to outsiders. Back at the hideout, Jin and his group say their goodbyes to Padrak, with Jin knowing he needs to find a powerful ally in the capital immediately. 3 days after taking down the bandits, Shido Jin and his group are back on the road. Sals looks up with a bit of worry, asking if there's actually a place for someone like her in the capital. Shido Jin stays calm, assuring Power that since she can read and handle math, she won't have any trouble finding work. Hearing that, Sal's beams, all her anxiety disappearing in an instant. Power points toward the horizon as the massive capital finally comes into view. Even the stoic Shido Jin takes a moment to stop and take in the sight. This is Kermosia, the heart of the capital and the center of power in this new era. The scale of the city is incredible, filled with unique buildings and winding streets. As they enter, the kids are wide-eyed, watching the bustling crowds that fill the city with life. Power explains that the capital runs on imports, so everything under the sun ends up here. She mentions that even folks from their little village come here to hawk their specialties. Shido Jin is genuinely fascinated by the variety of hybrid races passing them on the street. He realizes that this city has evolved into a real melting pot of different cultures. The streets are spotless, filled with shops selling exotic goods from all over the world. Law and order seem tight enough too, with kids running around safely through the markets. But looking closer, Shido Jin sees that even this gleaming city has its shadows. He spots the harsh reality of the class system, wealthy hybrids looking down on those in the alleys. He muses that every era carries its own heavy baggage, no matter how much time passes. Shifting his focus, he asks when the entrance exam for the academy is held. Power tells him it's next week, but getting into Harnisk Academy is no easy task. Nearby, a blonde noble named Milia Ultons watches them with disgust, calling them runts and half-breeds. As the sun sets, the group finally makes it to an inn to rest their weary feet. Nino and Sals are beyond excited, jumping headfirst onto the soft beds. It's been a long time since they've had a real bed to sleep in, and they're loving every second of it. Shido Jin takes a quiet moment to himself, thinking about his next move now that they've arrived. He looks at the coins he has left, knowing that living in the capital won't be cheap. The payout from the bandits was a good start, but it's not going to keep them afloat forever. He knows he also needs to get the kids settled into some work so they can support themselves. His main goal is tracking down the man behind the recent chaos like Lord Argus Walton, but he needs an inn first. He ponders his next move, knowing he won't get past the front doors without a solid plan. He wonders if he should start by digging into the corruptors of this era first. He knows there are already people like Lord Jita trying to weaponize these creatures for their own schemes. These corruptors are a massive menace, and he can't just turn a blind eye to the threat. He stares out at the city, his expression hardening with cold resolve. He's seen what happens when these things go unchecked, and he's not about to let history repeat itself. Turning to Sals, he asks how people in the city usually go about searching for information. She explains that back in their village, they all had to chip in for books because they were so expensive. But she tells him the capital has a library where he can do all the research he needs. A library? That might be exactly what Shido Jin needs to find his next lead. He thinks he might even find a lead on the research facility that Kagura left behind. But when he arrives, he's greeted by a librarian who quickly shuts him down. She explains that those books are national treasures, and entry is definitely not a free-for-all. The librarian explains that the archives are strictly off-limits to everyone, except faculty, nobility, and students who have been properly vetted by the academy. Shido Jin isn't too bothered by the rejection, admitting to Power that he wouldn't even be able to read the local script if he got inside. Later, back at their camp, Jin practices the alphabet by scratching it into the dirt, knowing it'll take some time before he can actually make sense of a book. While walking through the capital's busy streets, Shido Jin finds himself at a loss for his next move. He doesn't realize it yet, but a couple of hooded contract killers have been tailing him and the kids ever since they arrived. As one of them steps into the open, Shido Jin's instincts immediately flare up at the incoming threat. Without a word of warning, the wolf hybrid lunges forward and throws a heavy punch. Jin reacts without a second thought, raising his arm to intercept the blow with ease. He blocks the follow-up strike just as smoothly, completely unimpressed by the violent welcome. The assassin thinks he's got the upper hand, but he has no idea who he's actually messing with. Shido Jin's eyes sharpen as he continues to parry every desperate strike the hybrid throws his way. With a single, powerful kick, he sends the wolf hybrid stumbling back across the pavement. Suddenly, a massive explosion of fire erupts in the street, sending civilians running for their lives. The assassin isn't just a physical brawler. He's smugly throwing around divine power in broad daylight. Sals pulls Nino close to protect him, shocked that anyone would be reckless enough to use magic in the middle of a crowd. Shido Jin stands his ground, calmly asking what they want. The hybrid tells him that someone powerful finds his presence to be an eyesore. It doesn't take long for Jin to realize he's been targeted by a professional contract hit. Surprisingly, a smirk plays on his lips as he realizes this ambush is the perfect opportunity. The hybrid continues to boast, claiming that things will be much easier for everyone if Jin just vanishes from the capital. He lunges forward again, determined to finish the job as quickly as possible. But Jin moves like a shadow, his hand snapping out to catch the hybrid's wrist in a crushing grip. With a cold laugh, he slams the assassin into the dirt, completely ending any hope the guy had of winning. The second killer, a fox hybrid with red hair, joins the fray and charges up a massive ball of flames. Shido Jin doesn't even flinch as the fire erupts around him, his composure remaining entirely unshaken. A massive explosion rocks the entire street, kicking up a thick cloud of dust and debris. Through the smoke, the red-haired killer looks on in pure disbelief as he sees Shido Jin standing there unharmed. Jin reaches through the haze, his hand closing in on the second assassin's throat. He grabs him by the neck and lifts him off the ground, telling him to come back only when he's actually a threat. He tosses the man aside like garbage, daring him to try again if he's truly got the guts for it. The assassin is absolutely terrified, finally realizing that Shido Jin is definitely no inferior species. Just as the fight ends, a loud voice commands everyone to stop and stay exactly where they are. The city guard has arrived, and it's led by the same female knight Jin ran into before. She looks incredibly annoyed that her day off is being ruined by someone making a scene in the middle of the road. She points her weapon at Shido Jin, announcing that she's hauling the whole lot of them off to a cell. Shido Jin just smiles to himself, knowing his plan to be as loud and flashy as possible has paid off. The female knight's jaw drops as she finally recognizes Shido Jin as the inferior human from their previous encounter. Shido Jin stands over the defeated students as the dog-eared female knight approaches, recognizing him as that inferior species from before. She smirks, seemingly impressed or amused by the chaos he has caused. The female knight points her spear at him and says he has some nerve causing a ruckus as soon as he arrives in the royal capital. She laughs, remarking that once an inferior species, always an inferior species, and that they don't know right from wrong. A rabbit-eared girl nearby nervously interjects, explaining she just happened to be passing by and saw that those people were the ones who suddenly attacked first. The female knight looks blankly at her and concludes that she thinks it was self-defense. She looks at the defeated wolf student on the ground, nodding that they look familiar. Crouching down, she asks them if they are students from Harnisk Academy. She sighs, thinking that she just hopes the young lady isn't involved in this. Jin asks about this young lady, but the knight tells her subordinates to take the students away while dismissing his question as her just talking to herself. Jin notes that holy knights do patrols too, admitting he thought that was the guild's job. The knight explains the royal capital is huge, so they help maintain public order, then mentions she just happened to pass by while eating her way through town. She gives him a sharp, evaluating look and thinks to herself that still, something is different about him. She realizes this guy is seriously strong, nodding that those academy students from earlier weren't weak either. She walks away, telling him see ya and to not cause too much trouble in the capital. Shido Jin calls out for her to wait, saying there is somewhere he would like her to show him. The knight turns back, questioning if there really is somewhere he wants her to show him. The scene shifts to the Grand Argus estate at night. Sitting inside, Shido Jin bluntly asks Argus Walton to hire them. Argus is taken aback as Jin reminds him that he told him to visit if he ever needed help. Argus asks if their numbers haven't grown since they last met, and Jin casually replies that it just happened. Jin explains they ran into those bandits Argus warned him about, and he rescued the kids who were being held captive. When Argus asks about the bandits, Jin says he beat them up a bit and left the rest to the guild folks. Argus processes this, wondering if he really took care of it all by himself. Argus asks why he's with these children, and Jin explains they don't have any family and are what people call an inferior species. Jin says he figured he could at least find them a place to work. The female knight listens from behind as Jin is told he has no obligation to look after them, but he insists it's just his way of doing things. Jin declares that whatever the process was, he's the one who saved them, so he won't do a half-hearted job and will look after them to the very end. His conviction leaves both Argus and the knight momentarily speechless. Poful and the other child beam with happiness and relief at Jin's words. Argus agrees, saying the two can work there as live-in servants, which makes Poful shout out in joy. However, Argus stares intensely at Jin and says there is a condition. He tells Jin he wants him to become an instructor, leaving Jin wondering if he heard correctly. Poful and her companions sparkle in their new servant uniforms, appearing truly happy with their fresh start. Shido Jin looks at them and asks if they don't look the part, while Hakama Phil claps her hands in joy behind them. Poful bows deeply and thanks Lord Argus, who tells her there is no need for thanks. Argus instructs his staff to handle their education and strictly forbids discrimination just because they are an inferior species, receiving an immediate understood. The children wave goodbye as Shido Jin and Argus Walton walk away together. Jin asks if there is an ulterior motive for making him an instructor, and Argus admits he appreciates how quick he is to catch on. Argus says he doesn't know Jin's background, but he wants to trust that he is a good person and asks this favor of him. He states that he needs Jin to go undercover at Harnisk Academy. Jin looks back at him and asks what exactly he means by that. Argus Walton continues his explanation, noting that right now, this country is being targeted by multiple factions vying for supremacy, leading Shido Jin to ask if there isn't a king. Argus clarifies that the king is stricken with illness and doesn't have much time left, so a battle for succession has already begun behind closed doors. He explains the problem is that people without a legitimate claim to the throne are plotting to seize the country. Argus mentions they are using the invaders and dragging innocent people into their schemes. Jin realizes that the Lord from before isn't the only one they need to watch out for. Argus adds that such dangerous individuals are also lurking and maneuvering behind the scenes in the royal capital, and they must uncover their hideout as soon as possible. Jin asks if the most suspicious place for that is Harnisk Academy, which Argus confirms. Argus knocks on a door and says he is coming in. As he opens the door, Argus explains that she will guide Jin from inside the academy. He introduces his younger sister, Milia Ultons, who attends Harnisk Academy and is seen sitting elegantly on a sofa. Milia looks up as Argus introduces the newcomer, simply acknowledging him as her brother. Her expression quickly sours as she asks if he is really leaving the academy infiltration to this inferior species, referring to what they were talking about the other day. Argus tells Milia to show some respect, but she retorts that the only disrespectful thing is the very existence of an inferior species. She says she could perhaps tolerate the plain-looking country girl, Hakama Phil, but this job can't be entrusted to someone like him. Jin notes what a highly prejudiced young lady she is, while Argus apologizes and asks him not to take offense. The unnamed female knight whispers that while the young lady is gifted, she has an extreme prejudice, to which Jin replies that she does too. Milia asks her brother if he understands her point. Argus explains that this isn't just an infiltration, and that Jin also needs to fulfill his duties as an instructor. Milia doubts an inferior species can serve as an instructor, and asks if he even has the aptitude for it. Hakama Phil accidentally lets slip that Jin can't read, prompting Milia to question him in disbelief. Milia sighs, saying it is completely out of the question, but then pauses. Hakama Phil defends him, saying there are many things only he can teach, and that Jin is way more amazing than any of them. Milia remains silent as she faces off against Shido Jin. She eventually concedes that it seems he at least has the strength to keep the academy students in line. Milia looks back and reminds him that being an instructor requires more than just brute strength. Argus facepalms at the tense situation, while Jin and the children look on. The unnamed female knight realizes that those students being troublesome was the young lady's doing after all. Argus apologizes again and promises to give Milia a proper talking to later, though Jin says it is fine. Jin asks what exactly Argus was planning on having him teach as an instructor, and Argus answers spirit magic. Argus says that from what he can tell, Jin is highly skilled in spirit magic and asks if he is wrong. Jin asks what part of spirit magic he should teach, and Argus tells him the basics are fine. Argus lists 4 basic spirit magics: ignition, discharge, freezing, and healing, saying that if he can do even 2, that is enough. Jin asks if that is really all, which surprises Argus. Argus asks if he can also use special spirit magic that only a very few can handle, while Jin wonders about this special spirit magic. Jin thinks back to the bandit leader and realizes that Guy was actually considered exceptional in this era. Jin smirks, finding the situation interesting. Jin agrees to the task, deciding to overturn the common sense of this era just a little bit. 1 week has passed since the events in the capital, and it is finally the day of the entrance exams at Harnisk Academy. The school grounds are buzzing as prospective students arrive for the big day. Among the crowd, Hanaka is focused and working hard on her exam papers. In a quiet hallway, Argus Walton leads Shido Jin toward the headmaster's office. Their guide mentions that the 7th unit must be exceptionally busy even among holy knights, but Argus says it's simply their turn. Shido Jin is curious and asks him what he means by their turn. Argus explains that once a year, a member of the Holy Knights is rotated in to serve as a special instructor, and this year that duty falls to his unit. Shido Jin looks at the grand corridor and silently wonders if someone like him is really all right for the job. He keeps his cool and remains stoic as they continue walking. The official leading them continues on without saying another word. He stops at a large set of doors and tells them to follow him this way. He opens the doors and announces that the headmaster and the others are already expecting them. The elderly headmaster watches them enter from behind her desk. Argus bows respectfully and tells the headmaster it's been a long time. She asks if it's been since he graduated as valedictorian, nodding he's become quite distinguished in such a short time. The headmaster expresses her gratitude for his cooperation, but Argus insists it is merely his duty. She leans forward, mentioning that she has heard many rumors lately. She says he's not only dealing with corruptors, but is also entangled in domestic factional disputes. She says she understands why he lacks the manpower to spare and must be quite busy. Even so, she makes it clear that doesn't mean the academy should be neglected. Lord Jita speaks up with an insulting tone, asking if she surely doesn't intend to make that man an instructor. The room stays tense as the faculty members stare down the human candidate. Argus tells them to please put their minds at ease about the decision. He claims that Shido Jin is actually more capable than anyone else in his 7th unit. At the very least, he clarifies, that's the case in terms of combat techniques. The headmaster closes her eyes and says if Argus says so, then she supposes it is true. Lord Jita is furious and shouts that he objects, calling out to the headmaster. He argues that in this sacred academy of tradition, it is unprecedented for an inferior species to be allowed to teach. He slams the table and asks if she intends to bring shame upon them all. The headmaster notes that Lord Jita has spoken his piece and asks for Lord Ludman's thoughts. Lord Ludman, the portly vice principal, agrees with him and notes the academy is home to many students of noble birth. He warns that if an inferior species were to teach, there would undoubtedly be backlash from both students and instructors. The headmaster admits that emotionally she feels the same, but she leaves the thought hanging. She turns to Shido Jin and says they should hear his side of the matter as well. Shido Jin takes a calm step forward. He bows and apologizes for the late introduction, identifying himself as Shido Jin from Kodama village. The headmaster is impressed, thinking to herself how remarkably composed he remains even though he was mocked. Shido Jin says he understands their concerns perfectly, but says he has only one question. He asks if he is unfit because he is an inferior species, or if it's because he lacks the necessary ability. The headmaster lets out a small smile and says it is obviously the latter, since if one has ability, nothing else matters. She then asks if he can prove that he has it, to which Shido Jin is ready with an answer. Argus Walton smiles and asks why they don't just put it to the test right now. The scene shifts to the Harness Academy Spirit Magic Practice Field, an impressive open-air arena carved into the side of a mountain. Lord Jita stands opposite Shido Jin, nodding that since today is for entrance exams, there are almost no students around. He gives a wicked smile and adds that at least Shido Jin will be spared any public embarrassment. Shido Jin stares back in silence, completely unfazed by the instructor's taunting. The headmaster declares that the rules are simple and that they will fight using only spirit magic. She continues, explaining that as he is meant to be a spirit magic instructor, seeing his actual strength is the best way. In the stands, a group of students watches with curiosity, with one asking what is happening after hearing they were doing some kind of mock battle. Milia Ultons watches silently, thinking to herself that this might actually be the first time she has seen Mr. Jita fight. Shido Jin closes his eyes and sighs, thinking about how pointless the whole situation is. The headmaster looks on from the balcony with Professor Rudman and Argus Walton, saying that they should now see just how much an inferior species can do. Argus Walton watches with a bead of sweat on his face, thinking that this is actually the first time he will see Shido Jin fight. A narrative box explains that the physical abilities of an inferior species are low, and even if they possess divine power, they can only manifest a trivial amount of strength. The headmaster looks down at the arena, thinking to herself that she hopes her assessment was not incorrect before asking if they are prepared. Lord Jita gives a menacing smirk and simply says, "Then." He summons a massive ball of fire and shouts for Jin to allow him to take the first strike. Jita launches the fireball with an explosion, but Shido Jin slides effortlessly to the side to avoid it. The students watching from above are shocked by the intensity of the flames. Lord Jita notices the audience and chuckles, noting that it seems some of the students are watching after all. He immediately begins charging golden lightning and lets out a long, aggressive scream. He fires several concentrated bolts of electricity across the field with a sharp shout. Shido Jin twists and flips through the air, narrowly dodging the crackling lightning beams. Lord Jita scoffs at Jin's evasion, calling him a typical inferior species, and saying all he can do is flee. He boasts that while he may not have become a holy knight, he is the man who once graduated this academy as valedictorian. He unleashes another explosive blast of fire, declaring that an inferior species is no match for him. Shido Jin lands firmly on the ground as the fire dissipates behind him. He looks toward Jita and thinks to himself that this power was not meant to be turned against people, but he resolves that it cannot be helped in this situation. A swirling vortex of blue and black energy begins to gather in Jin's outstretched hand. He looks Jita in the eye and tells him he will show him a little of what he can do. Lord Jita is left confused for a second before black cracks begin to appear in the air and floor around him. With a sudden surge of force, Jita is slammed into the stone floor, which shatters under the pressure as he gasps in shock. Professor Rudman and the headmaster jump up, their faces filled with utter surprise at what just occurred. Argus Walton is equally stunned, staring at the arena with his mouth open in disbelief. Milia Ultons watches from the stands, her expression turned to one of pure terror. Jita is pinned to the ground and struggles to speak, desperately asking what just happened. Shido Jin walks closer and calmly explains that he manipulated the gravity around him slightly, asking if that was a spirit magic he was unfamiliar with. A smirk forms on his face as he notes that there seems to be much for him to teach at this academy. He tightens his glove and finishes by saying he has much to teach not only to the students, but to them all as well. Shido Jin stands tall in the middle of the courtyard, his opponent trapped within a humming hexagonal spirit magic barrier, marking an overwhelming victory with just a single move. The wolf instructor is shaking with shock and anger, unable to believe that a human just effortlessly blocked his magic. With a casual snap of his fingers, Shido Jin dispels the energy field and the remaining magic. The wolf instructor falls to his knees, staring up at the man in total disbelief. He manages to stammer out, "Why, what did you do?" But Shido Jin just calmly replies, "Spirit magic, so what?" The instructor keeps shouting, "I've never heard of spirit magic like that before. You must have used some kind of underhanded trick," while Jin just tries to calm him down with a "hey, hey." Shido Jin begins to say, "Well," while the wolf instructor continues his angry outburst in the background. The headmistress declares that settles it, and Professor Rudman agrees with a solemn, "Indeed." Students gathered on the balcony whisper to each other, completely stunned by the outcome. Students ask, "Did you see that? And what was that just now?" While Milia Ultons realizes that was definitely a special type of spirit magic. The princess wonders why. Unlike us, who evolved after receiving the blessing of spirits, the sacred power of inferior species should be practically non-existent. Milia stares down at the courtyard with a look of intense suspicion. The instructor even grabs Jin's collar, but the human just tells him to calm down as Milia thinks, just who is that man? 1 week passes, and the view shifts to the grand scale of Harnisk Academy. The school teaches regular subjects, but its true purpose is to train warriors who will defeat the invaders. A stern warning is given to the new students. Those who cannot keep up will be forced to leave this academy without mercy. The headmistress speaks from the podium, telling them, "But if you graduate from here, joining the Holy Knights won't just be a dream." She looks out over the crowd and emphasizes that everything depends on your ability. A cat hybrid student remarks, "There are a lot of freshmen this year. Yeah, looks like many of them are commoners." Milia stands silently on the balcony as a hand reaches out and Reyes, a lion hybrid student, says, "Yo." He addresses her, saying, "It's rare for you to show up at the entrance ceremony. I thought you weren't interested in other people." He continued with a smirk, "If there's some famous noble among the freshmen, you'd want to get friendly with them, right?" And she retorted, "Aren't you the same?" Suddenly, he notices something in the crowd and asks him, "What's that?" Reyes points down and asks, "Why is an inferior species sitting in the instructor's seats?" But Milia just tells him because he's an instructor. He shouted, "What?" She didn't even bother to explain and asked back, "From your perspective, what do you think about that man?" The lion hybrid is left speechless, thinking to himself, "Even if you ask me that, he's just an inferior species." Milia stares intently at the human instructor and admits, "At least that's what I used to think." Shido Jin sits in his assigned seat, feeling the intense gaze of the students from the balcony. He thinks to himself, this academy is huge. Investigating it will take time. The weight of the prejudice is clear as he thinks, even so, those stares hurt. First, I need to erase this inferior species image. Walking through the campus, Jin realizes at this rate, I stand out far too much. Instead of investigating, I look like the most suspicious person in the academy. First, I need to earn their recognition. A bell rings out, signaling the start of classes. In the classroom, the wolf instructor announces, "Now then, we will resume the spirit magic lectures starting today." He tells the elite students, "Make sure you don't get overtaken by the freshmen. Don't let your guards down. Though for you elite class students, this warning might not be necessary." With a devious smirk, he adds, "Or, I'd like to say, but." He looks at the empty room and asks, "What's this about? There are fewer people today. Do you even have any motivation, tilde?" Tilde. Milia, sitting above, also felt disgusted by the instructor's cheap trick. She knew all too well that it was a given. The instructor thinks with a smug grin, HMPH. Who would want to listen to an inferior species talk? He gloats internally, after all, today's lecture is being handled by an inferior species. I made sure to spread the word beforehand. He puts on a fake front and says, honestly, "Well then, Professor Jin, please introduce yourself." Shido Jin steps up to the podium and introduces himself. "As you've heard, my name is Shido Jin." He addresses the small group, saying, "Regarding spirit magic, I will be teaching you for a while. I look forward to working with you." Reyes looks at the new human instructor with a crossed-arm, skeptical expression and asks, "Can you really handle this job?" Shido Jin gives a subtle smile and simply tells the red-haired student, "That's for you to decide." Jin continues, telling him, If you think it has no value, you simply don't have to attend my class, to which Reyes just smirks and replies, "Oh, really?" Getting serious, Jin leans in slightly and adds, "But there's one thing I want you to follow." A small orb of light glows in Jin's hand as he issues a firm command. Do not use this power against people. He explains the mechanics of their world, stating that spirit magic has the power to hinder the incredible regenerative ability of the invaders. However, he clarifies that this regeneration inhibition does not activate against the human body, so it will simply result in an injury. And then he asks the class, "And why is that?" Jin clenches his fist, the light intensifying as he answers his own question, because this power was created to defeat the invaders. Milia Ultons watches from the crowd with a nervous, sweating expression as Jin finishes his warning. So please, do not misuse this power. A dark-haired student with wolf ears lets out a jagged haw and arrogantly asks, "Are you stupid?" as he declares that power is power. This wolf student, aggressor, leaning back in his seat, continues with a condescending tone, "I came to see what kind of lecture an inferior species would give. And you're saying us not to use spirit magic." Other students join in the mockery, and a female student laughs, saying, "You're just a powerless inferior species who doesn't want to be compared, right?" The entire lecture hall is filled with the sound of students snickering and looking down on the human standing at the podium. Shido Jin remains perfectly composed, his calm gaze scanning the room as the laughter continues. He breaks the silence with a cold challenge. "If you think I have no power, then try it." The wolf student, aggressor, is taken aback, letting out a confused huh, while Jin continues, "Use the strongest power you have and fire it at me." Jin stands tall and offers a deal. "If you manage to injure me with it, I promise I won't show up again after today." Hearing that he has a chance to get rid of the human, the wolf student breaks into a wide, malicious grin. The wolf student, aggressor, begins to manifest a surge of lightning and fire, shouting, "Don't regret it, inferior species. It'll be too late to back out now." The supervising instructor nearby panics as the energy crackles, screaming out, "WH, hey, you idiot, stop, you're gonna hit me too." With a fierce expression, the wolf student launches the lethal blast directly at the human, screaming, "Take this." The combined lance of fire and lightning streaks through the air, aimed straight at Shido Jin's head. A massive explosion of dust and energy erupts at the front of the classroom where Jin was standing. The wolf student, aggressor, smirks, convinced that his attack has obliterated the target. Suddenly, a razor-sharp magic dagger slices through the smoke and streaks back towards the attacker. The energy beam flies past the wolf student with terrifying speed, barely missing him. He stands frozen in terror, a look of complete shock on his face as the wall behind him is shattered by the impact. Shido Jin's cold eyes pierce through the dissipating smoke as he says, "If I had intended to, that attack would have finished you just now." Standing behind a solid hexagonal shield, Jin lectures the class, saying, "Judging people by appearances alone can be fatal." Reyes stares in disbelief, his eyes wide as he breaks into a cold sweat and wonders, what was that? Was that spirit magic? The room goes quiet as Jin addresses the students. "You called me an inferior species because I'm inferior, right? But since I'm stronger than you." Jin manifests a glowing aura around his hand and asks, "Then what should you call me? I'll give you the answer." He stands confidently at the podium and declares the new hierarchy. It's teacher. Shido Jin stands behind the podium, facing the classroom with Professor Rudman watching from behind. He calls out to the students, asking if they even know the conditions to activate spirit magic. Looking out at the small group of students, Shido Jin focuses on the one who just attacked him and tells him to answer the question, saying, You attacked me. Answer me." The wolf student, aggressor, looks back, confused, and asks if it isn't just about visualization. Attempting to explain, the wolf student, aggressor, says that you raise your divine power, picture the force you want, project it to the spirits, and then manifest it, claiming these are the basics. Shido Jin gives a subtle smile, nodding that while visualization is definitely important, it's not the actual condition to activate it. Blue energy gathers in Shido Jin's hand as he explains that spirits, or rather nanomachines, must receive a specific wavelength before they can unleash their power. The wolf student, aggressor, is taken aback by the term wavelength as Shido Jin clarifies that there are 8 fundamental wavelengths. Shido Jin starts his demonstration by manifesting a ball of fire above his open palm. He instantly shifts the energy into crackling bolts of lightning. With another effortless change, a glowing green orb of wind forms in his hand. Shido Jin creates a sharp shard of ice, telling the class that they should already know about things like freezing up to this point. Milia Ultons and Reyes watch in stunned silence as Shido Jin continues, saying that in addition to these common elements, there are others. He produces a dark purple mass for gravity manipulation and a brilliant white light for light intensity manipulation. A swirling green vortex demonstrates atmospheric pressure manipulation, as Shido Jin mentions the thing he showed them earlier. A large blue crystalline barrier surrounds Shido Jin, which he identifies as space protection. Professor Rudman is frozen in pure shock, screaming at the realization that Shido Jin can use 8 different types of spirit magic. Holding a small spark of energy, Shido Jin reminds them that visualization is key, just like how the student turned a discharge into a spear to throw at him earlier. A confident smirk crosses Shido Jin's face as he says, "Now." With his arms crossed and a smug expression, Shido Jin asks if they should finally begin the lesson. After the class ends, Shido Jin walks through the quiet hallways of the academy. Shido Jin stops to think, realizing he needs to investigate this sprawling academy, but he's hitting a snag. Glancing at the passing students, he notes that they are walking around everywhere he goes, making it impossible to find anything suspicious. He decides he needs to find a place where students aren't allowed, unaware that Milia Ultons is trailing behind him. Shido Jin looks back with a sharp gaze, while Milia Ultons watches him closely. Milia Ulton steps forward to confront him, arms crossed, and asks who he really is. Shido Jin stops as she admits he's not normal, since he clearly wasn't just some regular inferior species. Milia Ultons remains skeptical, stating there's no way an inferior species could handle all types of spirit magic. Shido Jin reiterates what he just taught in class, that anyone can use them as long as they know how to switch between wavelengths. Milia snaps back, telling him not to act like everything is so easy. Milia Ultons looks away, observing that if it were really possible, he wouldn't be drawing so much attention from the other students. She tells him they should go somewhere else to continue the conversation. The scene shifts to a quiet, open-air corridor of the academy as the sun begins to set. Milia Ultons looks back at Shido Jin and asks if he's going to answer her questions now. Shido Jin walks beside her, calmly claiming he's just an ancient human who slept in Kodama village for 100 million years, but Milia Ultons just thinks he's a pretty good joker. Milia Ultons takes a more serious tone, asking what exactly he was doing 100 million years ago. Shido Jin rests his gloved hand on his chin, admitting he did a lot of things and that he was an agent. Confused, Milia Ultons had no idea what an agent even meant. Jin cracked a joke, suggesting that it's someone who works themselves to the bone for their country. Shido Jin looks down, his expression hardening as he says he fought countless villains. A flashback shows Shido Jin in a modern military setting, sitting with his comrades. He thinks about how it still feels clear even though it was 100 million years ago. He recalls his team gathered around a whiteboard, planning an attack strategy with technical diagrams. He remembers being in the field, gun in hand, taking cover while bullets sparked off a nearby wall, nodding he can remember it like it happened yesterday. Shido Jin closes his eyes as a vision of an explosion blends with his face, thinking to himself how nostalgic it all is. Milia Ultons asks him how a person like him ended up sleeping for 100 million years, to which Shido Jin simply replies, "I failed." Shido Jin reflects on his past, thinking that he was arrogant enough to think he could handle it all on his own. A memory of a destroyed city plagued by monstrous creatures flashes through his mind, as he realizes that, as a result, he lost everything without being able to do a single thing. Back in the present, Shido Jin explains to Milia Ultons that the reason he took this lecturer job was so that if push comes to shove, he could count on them to help him. Milia Ultons looks at him skeptically, wondering to herself how much of that is the truth. As they walk through the academy grounds, Shido Jin asks, by the way, where are we heading? Milia Ultons simply replies that she is just fulfilling her duty as a guide, that's all. They reach a seemingly ordinary room, where a sound emanates from within as they open the door. Shido Jin looks around the cluttered interior and wonders, this is. Milia Ultons explains that this is where lecturers keep the materials for their classes. Shido Jin considers the space, questioning if it is just a storage room. He turns his attention to a bookshelf, noticing a small owl carving sitting among the books. His gaze sharpens as he inspects the area more closely. Shido Jin asks why they are here, and Milia Ultons reveals a piece of paper, explaining that it means she's been doing some investigating of her own. She points to a blueprint, nodding there is an unnatural space next to this room that is big enough to fit another whole room inside. Milia Ultons remarks how suspicious it is, certain that if there is something here, it is definitely in that spot. Shido Jin agrees as he moves the owl carving. A hidden mechanism is triggered, causing a section of the wall to slide open and reveal a dark staircase. Standing before the newly revealed passage, Shido Jin tells Milia Ultons that her deduction was spot on. Milia Ultons is surprised and asks how he knew. Shido Jin explains that even though this place is covered in dust, something stood out. He points to the shelf, nodding that this spot was unnaturally clean, attributing his find to a bit of intuition born from experience. Shido Jin begins to descend into the darkness, telling Milia Ultons he will go check what is inside and that she should wait here. She immediately protests, shouting for him to wait and that she is coming too. Shido Jin warns her that if there is something in there, it is a corruptor, and tells her it is dangerous. Milia Ultons glares at him, telling him not to dare look down on her. Milia Ultons proudly states that her grades are among the top in her year, and that she possesses skills no less than her brothers. Shido Jin gives a small smile and agrees to trust her. They make their way down the stone stairs, with Shido Jin using an orb of light to illuminate the path. Shido Jin observes that the path goes quite deep underground and thinks about how light intensity manipulation is convenient. Milia Ultons notices his focus and asks what about it. He looks into the dark corridor ahead, thinking this atmosphere feels like something out of a fantasy game where a monster might pop out. Milia Ultons catches the word and wonders if he said fantasy. Milia Ultons changes the subject, asking, by the way, about what he said earlier regarding fighting villains all this time. She asks if he already has a target in mind for who is suspicious. Shido Jin laughs it off, saying she is demanding a lot for their first day. Shido Jin pauses for a moment, admitting that he supposes he does. A vision of Professor Rudman appears as Shido Jin suggests that maybe he might be involved. Milia Ultons is curious and asks how he can tell. Shido Jin recalls Professor Rudman's behavior, thinking that he is calm when he is talking, but there is more to it. He reflects that when the professor is not talking to anyone, his mind isn't there, which is a trait seen in people forced to do things other than their intended purpose. He adds that the man is also abnormally guarded, although he tried to pretend he wasn't. Milia Ultons mentions that she actually thought Professor Gilda was the suspicious one. Shido Jin dismisses the idea, saying that teacher couldn't pull it off. Watching Milia Ultons, Shido Jin thinks that her emotions are too easy to read on her face, and that she probably is a good person at heart since she doesn't have a double-faced nature. They finally reach the bottom, and Shido Jin says well then as they look out into the cavernous space. Milia Ultons is amazed by the size of the area, stating she never imagined there'd be a space this wide under the academy. Shido Jin stops abruptly and asks, "What is this?" Milia Ultons follows his gaze and asks if he has found something. Shido Jin is visibly stunned, thinking to himself that he never thought he would find it in a place like this. They stand before a massive, high-tech metal door, and he slowly realizes that this is a gateway leading to one of the research labs Kagura had scattered across the world.